The sun hung lazily in the sky, casting golden rays over the small suburban town. It was one of those quiet afternoons where nothing seemed out of the ordinary, just another day at the local grocery store on Maple Street. Shoppers moved through the aisles with their carts, picking up bread, milk, and other essentials. The hum of conversation mixed with the soft beep of the checkout scanners created a familiar rhythm that had become part of the neighborhood's charm. 16-year-old Jasmine Carter stepped inside, her sneakers squeaking faintly against the polished floor. She pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket, the list her mom had hastily scribbled before heading to work. Marinara sauce, basil, ground beef, she muttered under her breath as she scanned the shelves. Her mind wandered to the lasagna recipe her mom swore would win first prize at the upcoming church potluck. Jasmine couldn't help but smile. Helping her mom in the kitchen was one of her favorite things to do. Unbeknownst to Jasmine, her every move was being watched, not by someone curious about her shopping habits, but by Linda Harper, the store manager. Linda stood behind the counter pretending to organize receipts while keeping an eye on the customers milling around. She prided herself on running a tight ship, always vigilant for any signs of trouble. Over the years, she'd developed a reputation for being overly cautious, especially when it came to teenagers. In her mind, kids lingering too long or looking out of place were often up to no good. As Jasmine browsed the pasta aisle, she paused for a moment, holding a jar of marinara sauce in her hand. She glanced at the price tag, hesitated, and then placed it back on the shelf. Maybe there was a cheaper option nearby. She didn't think twice about the action. It was just a split-second decision. But Linda noticed. To Linda, the hesitation looked suspicious. Why would someone pick something up only to put it back? Was she hiding something? Linda frowned, narrowing her eyes as she observed Jasmine continue down the aisle. She reminded herself of all the times she'd caught shoplifters red-handed, kids who thought they could slip items into their bags unnoticed. This girl wasn't much different, Linda told herself. Sure, she looked harmless enough, but appearances could be deceiving. Linda's instincts kicked in, urging her to act. Meanwhile, Jasmine remained blissfully unaware of the scrutiny. She hummed softly to herself as she added fresh basil and a box of lasagna noodles to her cart. She even stopped to admire a display of imported olive oils, wondering if her mom would approve of splurging on such a fancy ingredient. For her, this trip was routine, a simple errand to help out at home. But little did she know, forces beyond her control were already setting the stage for a confrontation that would change everything. Outside, the world carried on as usual. Cars drove past the store, neighbors chatted on sidewalks, and birds chirped in the trees. Inside, however, tension simmered beneath the surface, waiting to boil over. What started as an ordinary afternoon was about to take a dramatic turn, one that neither Jasmine nor Linda could have anticipated. Linda's suspicion grew with each passing minute. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about the teenage girl wandering through her store. To her, Jasmine's casual browsing seemed deliberate, like she was stalling or trying to appear innocent while secretly plotting something. Every time Jasmine paused to examine a product or glance at the price tag, Linda's unease deepened. Her mind raced with worst-case scenarios, fueled by years of ingrained habits and biases she didn't even realize she had. Finally, unable to ignore her suspicions any longer, Linda decided to intervene. Leaving her post behind the counter, she approached Jasmine with forced politeness. "Can I help you find anything?" she asked, her tone clipped and overly formal. Jasmine looked up, startled by the sudden intrusion. For a moment, she hesitated, unsure how to respond. Then, with a small smile, she replied, "No, thank you. I'm just looking for some things for my mom." Her answer did little to reassure Linda. If anything, it made her more suspicious. Why would someone so young be shopping for groceries? Shouldn't she be in school or hanging out with friends instead? These questions swirled in Linda's mind as she continued to hover nearby, watching Jasmine's every move like a hawk. Each step Jasmine took down the aisle felt heavier under the weight of Linda's unrelenting gaze. When Jasmine reached for a jar of marinara sauce again, this time placing it into her cart, Linda noticed her double-checking the label. In Linda's eyes, this simple act of comparison became evidence of guilt. She's stalling, Linda thought to herself. She's trying to distract me while she figures out what to steal next. The idea took root in her mind, growing, stronger with each second until she convinced herself it was undeniable truth. Determined to put an end to whatever she believed was happening, Linda returned to the front of the store. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the phone and dialed the non-emergency number for the local police department. Speaking quickly, she explained the situation. A teenage girl acting suspiciously, lingering too long in the aisles, and possibly attempting to shoplift. She described Jasmine's appearance in vague terms, emphasizing her behavior rather than providing concrete proof of wrongdoing. As she hung up the phone, a flicker of doubt crossed Linda's mind, but only briefly. She told herself she was doing the right thing, protecting her store and its customers. After all, better safe than sorry, right? Still, there was a nagging voice in the back of her head that whispered, maybe she was overreacting. But it was too late now. The call had been made and the wheels were already in motion. Back in the pasta aisle, Jasmine remained oblivious to the storm brewing around her. She carefully selected a box of lasagna noodles, comparing brands before settling on one her mom usually bought. As she placed it in her cart, she glanced at her watch, realizing she needed to hurry if she wanted to get home before her favorite TV show started. Completely unaware of Linda's accusations, Jasmine moved toward the checkout line, ready to pay for her items and leave. Outside, the quiet afternoon carried on uninterrupted. Neighbors chatted on their porches, children played in the streets, and cars drove by without a second glance at the grocery store. Inside, however, the calm was about to shatter. Within minutes, 2 police officers arrived, their presence instantly drawing attention from shoppers. What had started as a routine errand for Jasmine was about to spiral into something far bigger and far more complicated than anyone could have imagined. The sound of footsteps echoed through the store as 2 police officers entered, their uniforms immediately drawing stares from shoppers. They scanned the area briefly before spotting Jasmine near the checkout line. She was standing patiently, her cart filled with groceries waiting for her turn to pay. One of the officers approached her while the other hung back, glancing around the store as if searching for something, or someone else. "Excuse me, miss," the officer said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Can we talk to you outside for a moment?" Jasmine turned to look at him, confusion etched across her face. "Why? What's going on?" she asked, clutching the handle of her cart tightly. Her heart began to race, though she tried to stay calm. The officer didn't answer directly, instead repeating his request with a slight edge in his tone. "Please, come with us." Jasmine hesitated, unsure what to do. She glanced around, hoping someone might step in or explain what was happening. But the other shoppers simply looked away, pretending not to notice. A few pulled out their phones, recording the scene discreetly. Word spread quickly among the crowd. The police were questioning a teenager about shoplifting. Some whispered among themselves, speculating whether the girl had done something wrong. Others frowned, sensing that something about the situation felt off. Meanwhile, the second officer walked over to Linda, who was standing nervously near the entrance. "Ma'am, can you tell us what happened?" he asked, pen and notepad in hand. Linda swallowed hard, suddenly feeling less confident than she had when making the call. She recounted her version of events, emphasizing Jasmine's suspicious behavior and insisting she'd been right to report it. But as she spoke, she avoided making direct eye contact with the officer, her hands fidgeting anxiously. Outside, tension mounted as Jasmine tried to make sense of the situation. "I haven't done anything wrong," she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm just here to buy groceries for my mom." The officer nodded, but his expression remained stern. "We need to check your card and confirm everything is paid for," he explained. Jasmine blinked in disbelief. Paid for? Did they really think she was stealing? By now, a small crowd had gathered outside the store. Some people held up their phones, capturing videos of the encounter. Others stood silently, watching with mixed emotions: curiosity, concern, and in some cases anger. Among them was an older woman who recognized Jasmine. "That's Mayor Carter's daughter. she exclaimed loudly enough for those nearby to hear. The comment rippled through the crowd like a spark igniting dry grass. Murmurs grew louder as people realized the significance of the name. Inside the store, the officers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them stepped outside to confirm the identity of the teenager. Sure enough, a quick search revealed that Jasmine was indeed the daughter of Marcus Carter, the town's well-respected mayor. This revelation added a layer of complexity to the situation, one they hadn't anticipated when responding to what seemed like a routine call. Back inside, Linda watched the unfolding drama with growing dread. As snippets of conversation reached her ears, mentions of the mayor and accusations of racial profiling, her confidence crumbled. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that she might have made a terrible mistake. But it was too late to take it back. Now, the damage was done and there was no telling how far the consequences would reach. As the officers continued to question Jasmine, the atmosphere grew heavier. Shoppers whispered furiously, sharing opinions and debating whether the situation was justified. Social media buzzed with updates, photos, and videos of the incident, turning what had started as a quiet afternoon into a public spectacle. And somewhere in the midst of it all, Jasmine stood resolute, refusing to let fear or embarrassment silence her. Little did anyone know this moment would mark the beginning of something much bigger, a reckoning that would force the entire community to confront uncomfortable truths about bias, privilege, and justice. At City Hall, Mayor Marcus Carter sat in the middle of a city council meeting, listening intently as discussions about the town's annual budget droned on. His phone buzzed silently in his pocket, but he ignored it, assuming it was just another reminder or email. The room was filled with the low hum of voices, papers shuffling, and the occasional cough. It was business as usual until his phone buzzed again, this time more insistently. Marcus excused himself from the table and stepped into the hallway to take the call. On the other end of the line was his wife, her voice tense and hurried. "Marcus, you need to get down to the grocery store right now," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "They've accused Jasmine of stealing. The police are there." For a moment, Marcus froze, his mind struggling to process what he'd just heard. Accused? His daughter. The thought alone sent a surge of anger and disbelief coursing through him. "What do you mean, accused?" he demanded, his voice rising despite his effort to stay calm. His wife quickly explained what little she knew, that Linda, the store manager, had called the police and Jasmine was being questioned outside the store. Without another word, Marcus ended the call and bolted for his car. His heart pounded as he sped through the streets, weaving past slower vehicles and ignoring the honks of irritation behind him. By the time he reached the grocery store, a small crowd had already gathered outside. People stood in clusters, some holding signs that read "Justice for Jasmine" and "End Racial Profiling." Others recorded the scene on their phones, their expressions ranging from outrage to sympathy. Pushing through the crowd, Marcus spotted his daughter immediately. Jasmine stood near the entrance, flanked by 2 police officers who were still questioning her. Her face was pale, but she held herself with quiet dignity, refusing to let the situation break her. When she saw her father approaching, relief washed over her features, though she tried to hide it. Marcus embraced her briefly before turning his attention to the officers. "What is going on here?" he demanded, his deep voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. The officers straightened instinctively, recognizing the authority in his tone. One of them began to explain, but Marcus cut him off. "My daughter has done nothing wrong. She came here to shop, and now you're treating her like a criminal because someone decided to make assumptions based on how she looks?" The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. Shoppers nearby stopped pretending not to listen and turned their full attention to the confrontation unfolding before them. Marcus didn't care. He wanted answers, and he wasn't going to back down until he got them. He turned to Linda, who stood nervously at the edge of the scene, clutching a clipboard like a shield. "Is this your doing?" he asked, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. "Did you call the police on my daughter?" Linda opened her mouth to respond, but faltered under the intensity of Marcus's stare. For the first time, she truly understood the gravity of her actions. This wasn't just any teenager she'd accused, it was the mayor's daughter. And beyond that, it was a young black girl who had been singled out unfairly, likely because of biases she hadn't even realized she carried. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks, leaving her speechless. As Marcus continued to press both Linda and the officers for explanations, the crowd grew louder, chanting slogans and cheering in support of Jasmine. Social media posts about the incident spread like wildfire, drawing even more attention to the scene. What had started as a quiet afternoon errand had escalated into a public spectacle and a catalyst for change. Marcus knew this wasn't just about his daughter anymore. It was about every child who had ever been judged unfairly because of the color of their skin. It was about accountability, justice, and ensuring that no one else had to endure what Jasmine was experiencing right now. As he stood there, surrounded by supporters and detractors alike, Marcus made a silent vow. This wouldn't end here. He would use his position, his voice, and his influence to ensure that something meaningful came out of this painful moment. For Jasmine, for their community, and for everyone watching. The air outside the grocery store crackled with tension as Marcus Carter's voice carried over the murmurs of the crowd. His words were sharp, unyielding, and filled with a father's protective fury. "You don't get to accuse my child without proof," he said, pointing directly at Linda. "And you don't get to treat her like a criminal just because she exists in this space." The store manager flinched visibly, clutching her clipboard tighter as if it could shield her from the storm brewing around her. The two officers exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that the situation was spiraling out of their control. One of them stepped forward cautiously, attempting to diffuse the growing hostility. "Sir, we're just doing our job," he began, his tone apologetic but defensive. "We responded to a report." Marcus cut him off mid-sentence. "Your job is to protect people, not harass them based on someone else's assumptions," he shot back, his voice rising slightly. "Did you even ask her for a receipt before questioning her? Did you consider that maybe she's telling the truth?" The officer hesitated, glancing toward Jasmine, who stood quietly beside her father. She nodded toward her cart, where every item was clearly visible, still waiting to be scanned at checkout. Realizing they had no real evidence against Jasmine, the officers finally relented. "We're sorry for the misunderstanding," one of them muttered, stepping aside to let her go. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with an apology. He demanded accountability, not just from the officers, but from the store itself. This wasn't just about clearing his daughter's name. It was about exposing the flaws in a system that allowed such incidents to happen in the first place. As the officers retreated, Marcus turned his focus back to Linda. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as she stammered out an explanation. I thought she was acting suspiciously," Linda said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for this to happen." Marcus stared at her, his expression unreadable. "Suspicious how?" he asked pointedly. "Because she's black? Because she took her time shopping? That's not suspicion, that's bias." The crowd erupted into murmurs of agreement, some clapping while others shouted words of encouragement. For many, this moment felt personal. It wasn't just about Jasmine. It was about every time they or someone they loved had been judged unfairly because of the color of their skin. A young woman holding a protest sign stepped forward, addressing Marcus directly. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened here," she said passionately. "It needs to stop." Marcus nodded solemnly, acknowledging the sheer weight of her words. Turning back to Linda and the small group of store employees watching nervously nearby, he issued a stern warning. "This ends now," he declared. "I'm launching an investigation into your practices. If I find that racial profiling is part of your standard operating procedure, there will be consequences, not just for you, but for the entire chain." His tone left no room for argument. Inside the store, customers whispered among themselves, some expressing outrage over what had transpired, while others defended Linda's actions. Social media buzzed with screenshots of posts debating the incident, hashtags like Kirchner Justice for Jasmine trending locally and beyond. Reporters began arriving on the scene, eager to capture sound bites from witnesses and participants. What had started as a private ordeal had exploded into a public reckoning, shining a harsh spotlight on systemic issues few wanted to confront. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Marcus wrapped an arm around Jasmine, guiding her toward their car. Despite everything, she held her head high, refusing to let the day's events diminish her spirit. But Marcus knew the fight was far from over. Back at City Hall, he immediately called an emergency meeting with community leaders, activists, and representatives from local businesses. Together, they began drafting plans for workshops, training sessions, and policy reforms aimed at addressing implicit bias and fostering inclusivity. Linda, meanwhile, retreated to her office, shaken to her core. She replayed the confrontation in her mind, each word Marcus had spoken cutting deeper than the last. For the first time, she saw herself not as a victim of circumstance, but as part of a larger problem, one she couldn't ignore any longer. Whether she liked it or not, change was coming, and she would have to decide where she stood when it arrived. By evening, the story had taken on a life of its own. News outlets scrambled to cover the incident, airing clips of Marcus's confrontation with Linda and interviews with witnesses who had been at the store that day. Social media was ablaze with reactions, some supportive, others critical, but all united by one undeniable truth. This was more than just an isolated event. It was a reflection of deeper societal issues, and people were ready to talk about it. Jasmine sat in her room, scrolling through her phone as posts about her flooded timelines. Friends sent messages of encouragement, classmates shared memes poking fun at the situation, and strangers weighed in with opinions ranging from heartfelt support to harsh criticism. At first, Jasmine felt overwhelmed. She hadn't asked for any of this attention, she'd simply gone to the store to pick up groceries. But as she read through the comments, something shifted inside her. People cared, not just about her, but about making sure no one else had to go through what she did. That thought gave her strength. Meanwhile, the backlash against Linda and the grocery store chain intensified. Customers began organizing boycotts, posting photos of empty carts with captions like "Not until justice is served." Others left scathing reviews online, calling out the store's alleged history of targeting black shoppers. Corporate headquarters issued a vague statement promising to investigate the matter, but it wasn't enough to quell public outrage. Protesters gathered outside the store daily, holding signs and chanting slogans that echoed down the quiet suburban streets. For Marcus, the response was both inspiring and sobering. He knew the momentum couldn't fade once the headlines moved. On to the next big story. Change required action and consistency. Over the following days, he worked tirelessly alongside local activists to organize a series of town hall meetings focused on addressing racial profiling and systemic bias. Flyers went up around the neighborhood, inviting residents to share their experiences and ideas for reform. The turnout was overwhelming, with standing room-only crowds packing community centers night after night. At one such meeting, Jasmine decided to speak publicly for the first time since the incident. Her hands trembled as she stood behind the microphone, but when she began to talk, her voice was steady. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said, looking out at the sea of faces before her. "I was just trying to help my mom make dinner. But because of how I look, someone decided I was suspicious. That's not fair. Not to me and not to anyone else this has happened to." Her words struck a chord, moving many in the audience to tears. Parents nodded in agreement, thinking of their own children. Teenagers whispered among themselves, vowing to stand up against injustice whenever they saw it. Even skeptics found themselves reconsidering long-held beliefs. When Jasmine finished speaking, the room erupted into applause, a wave of solidarity washing over everyone present. The police department, feeling the pressure from both the public and city officials, announced plans to implement new training programs focused on cultural sensitivity and de-escalation tactics. Officers would be required to attend workshops led by experts in race relations, learning how to recognize and address implicit biases. While some officers welcomed the initiative, others grumbled privately, arguing that the changes were unnecessary. But Chief Harris, under direct orders from Marcus, made it clear compliance wasn't optional. Back at the grocery store, Linda struggled to cope with the fallout. Corporate headquarters reassigned her to another location miles away, citing operational needs as the reason. Though technically still employed, the move felt like exile. For weeks, she avoided eye contact with customers, haunted by memories of the confrontation and the angry faces outside the store. Eventually, she agreed to participate in the workshops Marcus had organized, hoping to understand where she had gone wrong and how she could do better. As the dust began to settle, Jasmine found herself at the center of a growing movement. Inspired by her father's leadership and the support of her community, she started a youth advocacy group dedicated to fighting racial injustice. They held rallies, created educational materials, and reached out to schools to spark conversations about bias and fairness. What had started as a painful experience had transformed into a powerful opportunity to learn, to grow, and to create lasting change. Weeks turned into months, and the small suburban town began to feel different. The grocery store incident had ignited a fire that refused to die down, sparking conversations in homes, schools, and workplaces across the community. Mayor Marcus Carter's initiative started bearing fruit as workshops on implicit bias and cultural sensitivity became a regular part of life for many residents. Businesses, including the grocery chain involved in the incident, were forced to take accountability seriously or risk losing customers altogether. Linda Harper found herself attending one of these workshops, seated awkwardly among strangers, who cast sideways glances at her. She recognized some faces from the protests outside the store that day. At first, she felt defensive, convinced that people would never let her forget what had happened. But as the sessions progressed, something shifted inside her. The facilitators shared stories, real-life examples of how biases could shape decisions without anyone realizing it. They talked about privilege, systemic inequality, and the importance of empathy. For Linda, it was like seeing the world through new eyes. One exercise stood out to her. Participants were asked to write down times they'd felt judged unfairly. As she listened to others share their experiences, she realized just how much damage assumptions could cause. A young black man spoke about being followed around stores his entire life, always treated like a suspect rather than a customer. An elderly woman recounted being ignored by service staff because of her accent. Each story hit Linda like a punch to the gut. She thought back to Jasmine standing there, calm but clearly hurt, as accusations swirled around her. For the first time, Linda truly understood why her actions had mattered so much, not just to Jasmine, but to everyone watching. The grocery store implemented new policies aimed at preventing similar incidents in the future. Employees underwent mandatory training sessions learning how to interact with customers respectfully and fairly. Signs went up near registers reminding shoppers of their rights, while cameras were repositioned to ensure transparency during disputes. Corporate headquarters even launched an advertising campaign highlighting diversity within their workforce. Though critics argued it was more about saving face than genuine change, still progress was progress, however imperfect. Meanwhile, Jasmine's youth advocacy group gained traction, drawing attention far beyond the town limits. Local news stations covered their events, and soon bigger outlets picked up the story. People admired Jasmine's courage, not just for speaking out but for channeling her pain into action. Her father watched proudly as she organized rallies, led discussions at schools, and partnered with other activists to push for policy changes. Together, they drafted petitions calling for reforms in law enforcement practices and corporate accountability measures. Some efforts succeeded, others faced resistance. But Jasmine learned that fighting for justice wasn't about winning every battle. It was about persistence. Even the police department showed signs of improvement. Officers who once dismissed the training programs begrudgingly admitted they'd learned valuable lessons. Chief Harris reported fewer complaints about racial profiling, crediting the workshops for opening minds and changing behaviors. Though skeptics remained, most agreed that the atmosphere in the department felt less tense, more focused on building trust with the community. At home, Marcus and his family reflected on how much had changed since that fateful afternoon. Life hadn't returned to normal, it couldn't, but it had evolved into something better. Conversations around the dinner table now revolved around activism, allyship, and hope for the future. Jasmine still encountered moments of doubt, wondering if she was doing enough or if her efforts truly made a difference. But whenever she felt discouraged, she remembered the cheers at the town hall meeting, the messages of support flooding her social media, and the younger kids who looked up to her as a role model. Those reminders kept her going. For Linda, the journey toward redemption was slower and quieter. After completing her training, she requested a transfer back to the original store, hoping to prove she'd changed. It wasn't easy. Some customers still recognized her and gave her cold stares, but she persevered. Slowly, she rebuilt relationships, earning trust through consistent kindness and fairness. One day, a teenage girl approached her counter, hesitating before asking for help finding an item. Linda smiled warmly, offering assistance without judgment. In that moment, she knew she was on the right path. Change didn't come overnight, but it came steadily, piece by piece. The town wasn't perfect, it likely never would be, but it was learning. And sometimes, that was enough. Months later, the town had transformed in subtle yet meaningful ways. The grocery store incident was no longer the center of daily conversation, but its impact lingered, shaping how people thought and acted. For Jasmine Carter, life had taken on a new rhythm. She balanced schoolwork with her growing role as an advocate for racial justice, often finding herself invited to speak at events or featured in local news stories. What had started as a painful experience had become a defining chapter in her life, one that taught her resilience, courage, and the power of using her voice. One crisp autumn afternoon, Jasmine stood behind a podium at the annual Unity Day celebration, organized by her advocacy group. The park buzzed with energy as families gathered to celebrate diversity and community progress. Booths lined the pathways, offering everything from cultural foods to educational materials about anti-racism initiatives. Kids ran around laughing while adults engaged in thoughtful discussions about inclusion and equity. It was a far cry from the tension-filled days following the incident, and Jasmine couldn't help but feel proud of what they'd accomplished together. As she addressed the crowd, her words carried both gratitude and determination. "We've come so far," she said, her voice steady and confident. "But we can't stop now. Change isn't something you achieve once. It's something you work toward every single day." The audience erupted into applause, many nodding in agreement. Among them was Marcus Carter, beaming with pride as he watched his daughter inspire hundreds of people. He knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but seeing this kind of unity gave him hope. Linda Harper also attended the event, though she kept to the edges of the crowd, blending into the background. She didn't expect forgiveness, nor did she seek recognition, but she wanted to show support. Over time, she'd learned to see herself not as a villain, but as someone capable of growth. When she spotted Jasmine speaking, she felt a pang of guilt mixed with admiration. The girl who had once been wrongfully accused now stood tall, turning adversity into action. Linda quietly vowed to continue doing better, knowing her journey wasn't over. The grocery store itself underwent visible changes. Customers noticed friendlier staff interactions, clearer policies posted near registers, and more diverse representation in advertisements. Employees participated in monthly check-ins to discuss challenges and successes related to inclusivity. While some skeptics still questioned whether these efforts were genuine, most agreed that the atmosphere felt lighter, more welcoming. Even longtime patrons admitted they shopped there more often now, appreciating the renewed sense of trust. Meanwhile, the police department continued refining its training programs, incorporating feedback from the community to make them even more effective. Officers began hosting open forums where residents could ask questions or share concerns without fear of judgment. These sessions fostered dialogue and helped rebuild strained relationships. Chief Harris credited much of the progress to Jasmine's advocacy, acknowledging that her courage had forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths. Back at home, the Carter family celebrated their victories, however small. Marcus often reminded Jasmine that systemic change took time, urging her to stay patient and persistent. His guidance grounded her during moments when the weight of responsibility felt overwhelming. Still, she found joy in the little things, like hearing a young child tell her they wanted to be like her when they grew up. Those moments reminded her why she kept going. By winter, the scars of the past began to fade, replaced by a cautious optimism. The town wasn't perfect. It never would. But it was learning to listen, to grow, and to stand together. Jasmine looked out her window one evening, watching snowflakes drift lazily to the ground. She thought about how far she'd come since that quiet afternoon in the grocery store. Life hadn't returned to normal. It had moved forward, shaped by resilience and hope. For Jasmine, the future held endless possibilities. She dreamed of expanding her advocacy work, reaching communities beyond her own, and inspiring others to fight for justice. As she turned off her bedroom light, she smiled softly, knowing the best was yet to come. The storm had passed, leaving behind fertile soil ready for new beginnings. And in that soil, seeds of change continued to grow.